The last message came at admin. The last message came at 3:17 a.m. After that, she vanished. At 3:17 a.m., Daniel's phone suddenly vibrated on the nightstand. The sound was short and dry, but it made his heart tighten instantly. He didn't wake up right away. At first, he only frowned and, half asleep, thought it was just another meaningless notification. But something inside him forced his eyes open. The room was dark, quiet, too quiet. The phone screen glowed like a pale rectangle. The message was from Emily. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't trust anyone. Not even me." For a few seconds, he simply stared at the words, as if he couldn't understand what they meant. Then blood rushed to his temples. He sat up so fast his vision blurred and immediately called her. The number was unavailable. He called again and again. By the third time, he already knew nothing would change, but he still pressed the button, as if that could somehow undo what was happening. 5 minutes later, he was already driving to her building. The city was empty, the traffic lights felt like mockery, and his hands were trembling so badly on the wheel that he was gripping it hard enough to hurt himself. He kept thinking about the last few weeks. Emily had changed. Nervous, sharp, distracted. She was an investigative journalist, and she kept saying she was digging into some very serious people. She never gave details. She only joked too lightly. "If something happens, you don't know me." Back then, it had sounded like a game. Now it didn't. There were no lights in her windows. The front door to the building was slightly open. The stairwell smelled of cold air and something metallic. By the third floor, Daniel was almost running. Her apartment was unlocked. He stopped in the doorway, and that was the moment he was truly afraid. Not the kind of fear that comes from movies or late-night calls, something deeper. The kind where you still haven't seen anything, but you already know that whatever is waiting inside will change the world forever. The apartment was in perfect order. Too perfect. A cup of half-finished tea sat on the table, still warm. Emily's phone was lying on the couch with a cracked screen, but the SIM card was gone. Her coat was hanging in the hallway. Her keys were in the bowl by the door. Her shoes were lined up neatly. Only the laptop was missing, and that was even worse than if the entire place had been turned upside down. That kind of order meant that whoever had come for her had not been in a hurry. Daniel walked through the rooms as if he expected her to step out of the bathroom or the kitchen and say, annoyed, that he was being dramatic. But the apartment stayed silent. Even the cat was nowhere to be seen, and Emily would never have left it behind like that. An hour later, the police arrived. The neighbors had heard nothing. The camera by the entrance had accidentally stopped working that exact night. There were no signs of forced entry. Hardly any signs of a struggle either. The official theory was voluntary disappearance. But Daniel knew Emily. She would never leave without her documents. She wouldn't leave her phone behind. She wouldn't abandon the cat, and she would never send a message like that without a reason. The next morning, he got a call from an unknown number. The male voice was calm, almost polite. "Don't look for her. This is not your story." The call ended. And in that moment, fear inside him mixed with rage for the first time. He started checking everything he could reach, her email, her notes, her drafts, her cloud storage. He barely slept, drank cold coffee, and answered the police in short, irritated sentences. On the third day, he found an encrypted folder. Inside were names, bank transfers, photos of meetings, contracts, and his name, the date, 3 days from now. At the bottom was Emily's note, "If something happens to me, he will be next." His hands began to shake. He wanted to go straight to the police, but again he remembered her words. "Don't trust anyone, not even me." What did that mean? That she could have lied? That someone had forced her to write it? Or that she herself had been using him as part of her own game? That evening he came home and immediately knew someone had been in his apartment. Nothing was stolen, but the documents were arranged differently. The book he had left open in the morning was closed. The bedroom window was slightly open. He froze when he stepped into the bathroom. On the mirror, traced with a fingertip, was one thing: 3:17. His mouth went dry. He slowly looked at the time on his phone. 3:16, and at that exact second, the phone vibrated. A new message. "You're late." Then a photograph appeared. Emily. Alive. Pale. Exhausted. In the background, a clock. 3:17. He zoomed in. In the reflection behind her shoulder, there was a silhouette. Blurred. Almost invisible. But it was there. Someone was standing next to her. Daniel went to the police. Detective Harris listened to him in silence, studied the photo, and said calmly, "The metadata shows this image was taken 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? Those words hit him harder than a slap. 3 weeks ago, Emily had still been there. 3 weeks ago, they had been fighting in his car in the rain. She had shouted, "You don't understand, this is dangerous." He had held her by the shoulders too tightly. She was trying to pull away. Then, blankness. As if someone had ripped a piece out of his memory. Later, another message came. "Remember the basement." His parents' house stood outside the city, old and nearly empty since his mother's death. His father rarely went there, but he had never sold it. When Daniel stepped inside, the house greeted him with dust, cold, and frozen silence. The closer he got to the basement door, the harder his heart pounded. He went downstairs. An old monitor stood in the corner. The moment he stepped forward, the screen turned on by itself. The recording was dated 3 weeks earlier. Time, 3:17. In the video, he was the one walking down into the basement. His face looked gray, strange, tense. Behind him, Emily, tied up, crying. Her mouth was taped shut. When he tore the tape away, she gasped and whispered, "Please." The screen went black. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. He grabbed the table to keep from falling, and with the horror came memory. Broken, painful, like shards of glass. Emily had not been investigating the mafia. She had been investigating a pharmaceutical corporation that, under the cover of charity, was conducting illegal clinical trials. On paper, everything looked perfect. Inside, falsified consent forms, missing patients, fake conclusions, deaths written off as complications. His father was the main investor, not directly, through a chain of firms, foundations, and frontmen, but the trail led back to him. Emily found out, and she came to Daniel not as a woman in love, but as someone who needed a way into the system. He begged her to stop, first calmly, then harshly, then almost in panic. He told her his father was dangerous, that she had no idea what she was getting into, that they would destroy her. She did not stop. And then a voice sounded in the basement. "Finally." Daniel turned sharply. Emily stepped out of the shadows. Alive. Calm. There was no panic in her eyes now, only exhaustion and cold determination. "You're not sick, Daniel," she said. "You don't have dissociative identity disorder. That was my version. I needed you to believe you were losing your mind." He froze, unable to respond. She spoke quietly, and every word struck straight into his chest. Forged medical records, fake consultations, planted medication, manipulated messages, deliberately intensified memory gaps. Everything had been designed to rip the ground out from under him and lead him to the place where the evidence was hidden. In the far corner of the basement stood a server. On the metal table lay folders, flash drives, printouts, secret documents, signatures, his signatures. Harris stepped out of the darkness, out of uniform. "Thank you for coming on your own," he said. Daniel felt nausea rising in his throat. "You signed the investment agreements," Emily said quietly. "You told yourself you didn't know anything, that you just weren't looking closely, that you hadn't personally killed anyone. But you closed your eyes, and while your eyes were closed, they built a machine that killed people." Sirens sounded outside. Handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Everything looked like the end. But a second later, the sirens were drowned out by the heavy growl of engines. Black SUVs rolled into the yard. His father stepped out of the first one. Calm, confident, in a long dark coat, with the same expression Daniel had feared since childhood more than any scream. Other men stepped out behind him. His father swept his eyes across the basement, saw the server, saw Emily, and gave the faintest smile. "Thank you, Emily," he said. "You led us straight to the leak." She went pale. For the first time, real fear flashed in her eyes. His father looked at Daniel. "Sometimes sacrifices are necessary," he said almost gently. And then Daniel understood. He had been the bait. Emily, too. All the threats, the disappearance, the messages, the clues, the basement, it had all pulled them into one single point. His father had been waiting for exactly this moment. But in that same second, Daniel's phone lit up in his hand. 3:17. The screen flashed. A live stream. At first, no one understood what was happening. Then folders began opening in the cloud. One after another, the automatic upload had already started. Every file from the server was going online. Contracts, patient lists, videos, financial schemes, internal letters, signatures. The documents were becoming public right now. His father's name was exploding across headline after headline. The view count was rising before their eyes. Emily slowly turned toward him. "You knew?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her calmly. "Don't trust anyone. Not even me." The silence after those words was more terrifying than the sirens. He really had started his own investigation earlier, long before Emily decided she could use him. At first, he only wanted to check his suspicions, then to protect himself, then to understand what his father had been hiding his entire life. And when the trail led him to patient number 17, something inside him changed completely. The world narrowed to one number. One time, 317. He used Emily because he knew she would never back down. She used him because she thought he was the weak link. His father used them both because he had always treated people like disposable material. But at 317, everything truly spiraled out of control. Sirens mixed with shouting. Harris's people argued with his father's men. Someone tried to rip out cables, someone tried to smash the server, someone tried to grab the phones. But it was too late. The empire was already collapsing live, not in court, not in a sealed case file, not in a newspaper that could be bought, but in front of everyone. And while everything around him was breaking apart, Daniel stood completely still, because he understood the final detail. The first patient died at 317, patient number 17, and it was not some random person. It was his mother, not a faceless line in a report, not a complication, not an unexpected reaction. His mother, a woman who had believed her husband for years, smiled beside him at charity events, signed papers, and then suddenly died far too quickly before anyone could ask the right questions. Back then, Daniel had been too young to see the lies in the documents, too shattered by grief to notice how rushed the funeral was, too dependent on his father to understand. The truth had not been hidden. It had simply been placed in plain sight, knowing no one would dare look too closely. 317 was not a code, not a game, not a killer's signature. It was the time his mother died, the time his father believed had been buried with her. The numbers on the screen changed. 318. And for the first time in all of this, Daniel smiled not because of victory, not because he had outplayed Emily, not because he had destroyed his father's empire, but because the revenge was complete. But it was not a happy smile. There was no relief in it, only the burned-out emptiness of a man who had lived beside lies for too long and had finally become cold enough to turn them into a weapon. Emily looked at him and seemed to understand, for the first time, that the disappearance had not begun on the night the message arrived. And not even on the day she went after the corporation. It had begun long ago, the moment a boy lost his mother, while his father stood beside him speaking the right words in the right voice. That was when the sun disappeared, and in his place remained the man who waited for 317 and came back to collect the debt.